We welcome Jake Rowe from DawgsHQ, and it has been a busy week in Athens. But Jake, one of the reasons I want to have you on, because I have people asking me all the time, like, what's going on at Georgia? Because there's so many players going to the transfer portal. But I have yet to see somebody who's starting next year going to the transfer portal.
You know, it's one of those things where, listen, I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, man, Georgia's just cleaning house and they're telling all these guys to go and they don't want any of them to come back. I mean, A.J. Harris, Austin Blasky, Marvin Jones Jr., Jamon Dumas-Johnson, I think are all guys that they would have loved to have kept around. But you look 15 transfers to this point, 15 guys in the portal. I think there was writing on the wall for pretty much every single one of them. I mean, maybe not Marvin Jones Jr. I think he would have probably been a guy that was going to have a role that wasn't really going to change and maybe increase. But, you know, there was discussion about A.J. Harris playing star or playing safety. A.J. Harris wants to play cornerback. All of these young defensive backs do. It's the premium position. Jamon Dumas-Johnson's snaps per game went from 44 in 2021 to 37 last year. They're going to go, and this is snaps per game. I know he missed time, so this is not a volume deal.
But C.J. Allen is probably the bigger reason, right?
Right, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson. You know that. I mean, that's I think J.D. Piquel kind of hit the nail on the head. Nobody knows the talent as well as the players who work out with these guys and do it. And I think Jamon knew that those guys were going to end up, maybe cutting into his workload. I still think he was going to play. I still think he was probably going to start. But, I mean, it's not great for your draft prospects if your snap count kind of trends down as your career goes on.
Well, and we just go back a couple of years to Jermaine Johnson, who was going to be an important player on Georgia's 2021 defense, but not the most important player, obviously, because they had so many good ones. He goes and becomes the ACC Defensive Player of the Year at Florida State. Like, that's what I think with Georgia especially, and we see it with Alabama and Ohio State too, when there's that much talent, everybody's going to be happy with the playing time they get.
Nobody looked at Ohio State when Jamison Williams left and was like, what is going on? Right. And I don't know that there'll ever be a more impactful transfer from one year to the next. I mean, it was unbelievable what that guy did in Tuscaloosa. Saw it with my own eyes for, 5-6 quarters. I mean, he was unbelievable. I mean, so Georgia has to have this happen, Andy, one way or the other, because they're signing a class of 26, 27, 28 guys. They're going to want to bring in probably a half dozen guys via the portal. You can't do that unless you have attrition. And most of these guys are guys that are who spent some time at Georgia, spent 2, 3, 4 years at Georgia. And they're like, all right, listen, I gave it my all. It hasn't worked out to me this point. I can't bet on next year being the year anymore. I've got to go somewhere where I can maybe get some assurances and the path of least resistance in some ways. And, some of these guys are doing that. And kudos to them for doing it. A guy like Jackson Meeks, who's been a big-time special teamer for Georgia for 3 years. He's going to Syracuse, going to play for Fran Brown. Austin Blasky, who, if not for an illness and an injury early this year, I mean, this is a guy that Georgia coaches, and staff around the building will tell you, we trust this guy. We trust this guy to play winning football for us. If not for a preseason illness and a early season MCL injury, he's probably rotating with Georgia at right tackle and maybe a returning starter this year. It didn't work out for him, so he's moving on. I don't want to say that all of this is completely insignificant, but if I'm sitting here and you're like, all right, let's take the temp 1 to 10, how do you feel? How worried should Georgia fans be about the transfers? I would put it at a 2 maximum because to this point.
Well, and what it means is they might not be as deep. It's going to be hard to be like they were in 2021 on defense. Like that's probably not going to happen again in this era of college football, just because it's going to be hard to keep those guys. If they're talented, they're going to go start somewhere else.
Somebody was bringing it up to me the other day. They said, because I made the comment, I said, hey, it's tough to kind of, they were talking about Georgia's defensive line taking a step back this year. And I said, well, what did you expect? They lost, 4 first rounders. If you count Nolan Smith as an outside linebacker, there are 5 first rounders in 2 drafts. And they're like, well, Alabama kept reloading. And I was like, oh, Alabama kept reloading in the age of the portal because,
they haven't.
We had to wait a year. That's back when you had to sit out a year if you wanted to transfer. The idea that you're going to have a Quinnen Williams play one snap in the national championship game in 2017 and then come back in 2018 and be one of the best players in college football, those days are probably over.
Yeah, no, you're right. Now, Georgia, you mentioned they got to sign a full class of freshmen. We'll see who's in that class. We're waiting to hear something from Dylan Raiola. That news has been out there for 6 days now that he's probably going to flip to Nebraska. What's the temperature on the Georgia side of things with that one?
Well, I mean, with the fans, I mean, they're very disappointed, obviously. I mean, this is a guy who, listen, I'm going to bring this back full circle here, but, he's a guy who played at 4 different high schools, and this isn't your typical play at 4 different high schools. This is, family moving. Dad has some different business ventures going on. I mean, this is not, this is not Bear Alexander. This is not always looking for greener pastures. Well, he's probably going to flip to Nebraska. All right. And when he does, it'll be the 3rd school he's committed to. I think, you look at it and some of them are not surprised. Some of them are kind of frustrated. He was such a vocal recruiter in this class, and this seemed to happen right on the heels of Georgia going in home with him. Now, I think there are multiple things at play here. I think that, they started asking the question, what are you going to do if Carson Beck goes pro? I think Georgia was very honest with him and said, hey, listen, we're going to go in the portal. We got 29 snaps returning at quarterback. I think that may have played a role in it. But ultimately, I would like to say that I think that they're probably going to Nebraska to get a very, very good chance of starting year 1. And I applaud it. And I applaud it from this angle. Obviously, we saw Kyle McCord kind of reverse course. No longer was Nebraska Nice committed to Syracuse. Nothing's guaranteed, man. Nothing is guaranteed in this world. I mean, you may never get a shot. It's the reason I've used the same reasoning as to why I don't think Carson Beck should go pro, because if he becomes a late 2nd, early 3rd, maybe 4th round prospect through the process, you're at that point, you don't know if you're ever going to get an opportunity to be the starting quarterback or not. But if you are a 1st round pick, you will. Well, Dylan Raiola doesn't know if he comes to Georgia if he's going to get a shot. There are some things standing between, especially if Georgia's going to go ahead and go after a portal quarterback. Go do what you got to do, man. Go play. Go get on the field as quickly as you can and bet on yourself and see if it works out. Because I don't think anybody's ever said, hey, I turned down that opportunity to play so that I could learn, and I felt really good about it. You got to get on the field.
You mentioned Carson Beck. He has said he's going to play in the Orange Bowl, but has not said whether he's coming back next year or not. How does Georgia handle that? Are they going to get a decision before this portal window closes so that if he decides to leave, they can hang the help wanted sign and be like, we need somebody?
Andy, I've been saying this for a little while, and I'm still going to hold on to it. I'd be surprised if we don't find out pretty soon. And I'll be also surprised if he goes pro. At this point, I think we've heard enough to suggest that there's a very good shot that he's going to return. I think that there's, he said today, and it's got Georgia fans a little kind of feeling some type of way about it, that it's been the hardest decision of his life. Well, I'm sorry, guys. That's just true. I mean, this is a very tough decision. I mean, you're telling me you've got a shot at the NFL and you're even contemplating doing something else. It's very, very hard. But ultimately, I think Georgia's going to get some good news from him in the near future, unless something changes. And that's just kind of my take on it.
Yeah, and if you look at the draft class and the way it's going, so it's still Caleb Williams, Drake May at the top of this one. Jaden Daniels has kind of played his way into the conversation as well. But Beck has the measurables, everything an NFL team would want. But if he comes back, then he probably goes into the 25 draft process as one of those guys that everybody's hyping as a first rounder. Now, whether the NFL teams agree with that's another story, but I would imagine another year of development, and he's certainly in that mix.
Yeah, it feels like him or Quinn Ewers. It feels like those two will enter the whole 2024 season, provided that Quinn Ewers does as has been indicated, or maybe he's come out and said and comes back. I think that those two will probably be at the top of the heap. And, if you can put yourself in that top 3 discussion, if you can put yourself in that top 3 of, all right, because I think Shedeur Sanders is probably going to be in that mix as well. But, I count me as a skeptic on Colorado just rebuilding that offensive line with dudes from UConn and Houston. But ultimately,
Indiana, don't forget Indiana.
Indiana as well. Also Jackson State. But I think that those three, if you can get yourself solidified kind of in that top three deal, you got a chance to be a top 15 pick. And if you're a top 15 pick, you're going to get an opportunity to start in the NFL, and you're going to make life-changing money just with that first contract.
Yeah, or even like you look at Will Levis, who was talked about as a first-round guy for that entire last season at Kentucky. He doesn't go in the first round, but as a rookie, he is starting. And so you're right. You got to be in that discussion, and you're going to get every benefit of the doubt once you get in the league, which is a big difference.
It truly is, and I because if you're that third, fourth round guy and you're good, but you're not great, then they will move on from you pretty quickly as the backup. 2-3 years, they're trying to start over. They're like, oh, well, we like this guy in the second round, or oh, we like this guy in the third round. And you kind of get lost in the wash pretty quickly. I mean, I talk with my dad a lot about football, and we always talk about the fact how many quarterbacks didn't get a shot that had what it took to handle it. There are dozens and dozens out there who probably had what it took to be a really good quarterback in the NFL, and they never really got a look.
So you mentioned Georgia taking some players out of the portal. Thus far, it's not a huge list, but we've heard names. We've heard like Trevor Etienne from Florida is a possibility for Georgia. Who are some of the guys that we may see come out of the portal and land in Athens?
Well, I mean, London Humphreys is a guy from Vanderbilt. And, listen, I was in the same boat as a lot of Georgia fans when that was first brought up. I was like, okay, listen, I knew he had a 50-something yard touchdown against Georgia when in Nashville this year. But I was like, London Humphreys, I mean, you're looking for receivers out of the portal. You're going to go kind of get maybe the second leading receiver from Vandy. I mean, really? And then I started talking to people about him, and they're like, man, this cat is an elite athlete. I mean, he's a true 6'2", 200-pound kid with 600 meter speed. He's good, really good baseball player, multi-sport athlete. I mean, this guy can go. So, I think Georgia feels really good about where they're at with him. I think the I's are getting dotted and the T's are crossed right now. I do think that they are a major, major player for Trevor Etienne, and I think that is a big position of need for them, kind of a pass-catching, explosive running back. There's been some talk, about Xavier McLeod at South Carolina, and after playing 4 games there and really not meshing well with what the Gamecocks did, Georgia had him in for a visit. I think Georgia's in pretty good shape there as well. And I know they like that body type, that 6'4", 6'5", 310-pound body type. Outside of those guys, I would maybe point to Colby Young at Miami. Mm-hmm. They don't have that 6'5" guy in the receiver room right now. He's 6'5", 215, grown man. I mean, big dude at receiver in that Lawrence Cager role, who had a really good career, who had a solid career at Miami. And then, when he was healthy, was really good for Georgia. So I think those 4 are kind of ones you can really circle. But I know Georgia wants more at outside linebacker. I think Georgia's going to try and add, in the defensive backfield. They had Trey Jones from Central Michigan, a big physical safety in town this past week. They're still continue to look at receivers, and listen, they're going to be in the transfer portal market for, you talk about a help wanted sign. They've got some specifics they're looking for, and that's that 6'3", 6'4" or taller, 330-pound anchor that can kind of sit there in the middle, because Nazir Stackhouse and Warren Brinson look like they're coming back. And Nazir Stackhouse this year played more snaps in 13 games than Jordan Davis did in 15 games in 2021. So they're looking to kind of take some of the load off of him as that nose tackle.
Yeah, and that's, again, what we were talking about with that depth. It's hard to have that level of depth that they had before. But have we seen the last time Ladd McConkey plays in a Georgia uniform?
That's a good question, Andy, because – I thought foregone conclusion at the end of the season. Absolutely. Absolutely. I thought that was it. Then you started hearing, well, it's not a done deal. And, while I probably would lean a little bit more towards him leaving right now, he hasn't informed the staff of a final decision. Brock Bowers has, and I think we all probably know what that decision is.
Yeah.
But Ladd McConkey has not. And so I think that one's a little bit up in the air. I will tell you this, and I've told our board, and I've reported this on our site for a couple of weeks now, so I don't really have to, continue, putting that behind a paywall. I spoke to an NFL scout over a week ago who told me that he just kind of had the type of season as a 5'11", 190-pound receiver that confirms every fear that an NFL team is going to have about him. His past 15 games, it's been knee, it's been back, it's been ankle. And, I think the world of him. I think he's a phenomenal player, but I do think he has a lot to gain by coming back if he can stay healthy, which is a gamble in and of itself. And so I think that's something he's going to have to consider. But I know Georgia would welcome him back with open arms.
Well, and it's interesting because even if he's back, you don't know how much he plays in the Orange Bowl because of the injuries and everything else.
Right.
But what might this team look like in the Orange Bowl? We found out that Trey Benson's not going to play for Florida State in the Orange Bowl. Not really sure exactly where everybody else is there. But what do you think Georgia looks like in the Orange Bowl versus what it looked like in the regular season?
That's a phenomenal question. I think you're going to see some guys play that you typically may not see. Like I think Kendall Milton, who I believe is 100% gone. I believe he'll play. I believe Cedric Van Pran will play. As of like a week or so ago, that's where that was leaning pretty heavily. I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that Brock Bowers would opt out. I mean, I think that maybe not go out there and see him play 55, 60 snaps, but I think he might try to give it a go. I think a lot of guys are going to play for Georgia in this Orange Bowl. This is a very tight team, very together team, and I think they'd like to finish it out the right way. Honestly, it sounds weird, but would Florida State's opt-outs, like if Johnny Wilson and I can't remember the other Rodgers, Keon Coleman, if they opted out, would Kamari Lassiter maybe be like, all right, well, I'm not going to help myself a whole lot in that game now because I was really looking for an opportunity to go after those guys and see if I could up my draft stock. Would that happen? I don't know. That's a tough question to answer, but it's not out of the realm of possibility. So I think there's some moving parts there, but I do expect Georgia to bring a lot of players, obviously not any of the transfer portal guys, but to bring a lot of players there. The one guy I would expect, and he's already said he's coming back, or it's already been reported he's coming back. We've confirmed that, is Smile Munden. Not going to shock me at all if he sits it out, because that was one dinged up guy all football season this year. And it wouldn't shock me at all if, even though he's coming back, for him to sit the bowl game out and try to get his body right.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because it felt like during the SEC championship game, there were a lot of guys playing for Georgia who were just sort of, they had to play that game. They wanted to win the SEC, wanted to go to the playoff, but they needed that break because a lot of guys were pretty dinged up.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, honestly, I felt like if Georgia could have gotten through Alabama in the SEC championship game, I would have felt really good about Georgia in the playoff, because I felt like they would have had a much healthier team at that point. You and I have talked about this, a couple of times, is Georgia had a lot of injuries early in the season. They found a way to get healthy for kind of that late season gauntlet, and then that late season gauntlet beat them up again. And so then you got into that SEC championship game and they didn't play well enough, which that's the way it was always going to happen. Georgia fans say it didn't have to happen that day. Well, when you're that talented and you're that, well put together as a team, you're probably not going to play your best game and snap a 29-game win streak. It's probably going to be a B game, a C game that's going to knock you out. And that's what Georgia played. They got beat. They were banged up. And then it just kind of turned into one of those situations where, obviously I do think, again, that Georgia's going to have a lot of these guys. I don't think there's a lot of them you've seen them play their last game in a Georgia uniform. But I also don't think that everybody is going to play in that game.
Do you think Georgia fans, given what they've experienced the last 3-4 years, are ready for the new SEC schedule where hardly anybody's going to go undefeated? Like I'm looking at their schedule for next year, and it's like, they start with Clemson, and they have a stretch of Alabama, Auburn, Mississippi State, Texas, and they also have a stretch of Florida, Ole Miss, Tennessee. Like it's going to be tough. And even if Georgia's the best team in the SEC, like they could be 10-2.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think folks are going to be excited about it. I think they're really bummed out about this coming schedule, not because it's difficult, but because it's so difficult on the road. Like, I know Georgia fans would love to have Texas or Alabama at home, just to get one of those games at home. And, the home schedule is lackluster. It just is. I mean, compared to the road schedule. And so I think that's something that probably has fans more bothered than anything. But yeah, I mean, ultimately that is going to be one of the toughest slates in the entire country. You're going to play 10 Power 5 games. You got bookend ACC games there with leading the season off at Clemson, or not at Clemson, in Clemson
in Atlanta, yeah.
And then you got Georgia Tech at home. But it's kind of the usual suspects as far as hosting home games outside of Mississippi State, and that's just not gonna, rest in peace Pirate, because that was about the only thing that could have made that thing any fun.
Well, it'll flip back. Georgia fans may have to wait a year longer than the other SEC fans, but they're going to get that home schedule they've been waiting for. They've
been waiting on it for sure. And listen, I got to give them credit. Now, I give Georgia fans crap all the time about the way they flip flop on things and kind of the way they overreact to things. I don't mind doing that, but they have been consistent for a few years now. That they just wish the home schedule had a little more juice, and that they want it again this year, and hopefully that 2025 schedule will get tough. We're going to have a tough angle to look at all of it because the press box is getting moved, but whatever.
Well, you were spoiled. You had the best press box in America. For those who don't know, the Sanford Stadium press box, like Sanford Stadium's dug into the ground, so like you essentially walk from street level into the press box, which is was mezzanine. And I remember the first time I went there thinking, why would they give these seats to us? They could sell these for so much money. And that's what Georgia and Alabama and Auburn have done. And God bless them, it's their thing. But I am hoping that for Georgia fans, because I think of the way the divisional schedules worked out and the protection of the Tennessee-Alabama game, the Georgia-Auburn game, and how that made SEC schedules kind of boring for a while. Like, Georgia fans have probably suffered the most from that, because the Florida game's in Jacksonville, so they don't get them at home. Like, it's time for them to get that. So hopefully 2025 is the year, but they get to see some cool places next year. Yeah,
absolutely. Excited to go to Austin. Kind of honestly a little bit worried about the F1 race being there and how wild that's going to be. That's going to be one crazy weekend for the DawgsHQ staff, but hope we all come back. Same time.
Exactly. Well, the question is, how many rooms did you book at the Embassy Suites in Tuscaloosa for $4,400 a night?
None. I'll stay in. Listen, I'm gonna go to Hoover. I'm gonna get me a deep dish pizza from Tortugas, and I'll probably hopefully watch a little. Actually, I can't remember when that game is. Maybe watch. Hopefully, the Braves will still be in the playoffs at that point.
There you go. See, I might go Homewood Sauce Barbecue.
Oh, they will. Yeah.
So lots of look. You're okay if you can't stay in Tuscaloosa. There's some places, if you can't stay in town, you're missing out. But if you can't stay in Tuscaloosa, you can get a pretty good meal in Birmingham. So
listen, I'll just stay in Tuscaloosa when they play Mississippi State.
That's the trick. That's what people don't know.
Alabama's out of town. You can have your run of Tuscaloosa,
that's
Alabama.
Right. If you are the king of Tuscaloosa. Exactly. Jake, thank you so much.
All right, dude.
Thank you so much for watching. Just a reminder, subscribe to this channel right here so you never miss an episode of Andy Staples on 3. And oh, by the way, watch all the other great videos on the On3 Sports YouTube channel.